Today I'm gonna do first of all an unboxing of this Corsair VS550 watt power supply. Next then I'm gonna compare it regarding the different features, amperages and the cabling to this Be Quiet 500 watt power supply. I had issues with this 500 watt Be Quiet power supply. Actually I repaired it yesterday. It totally works. You might see the repair and teardown video in my video list. The thing is that I just no longer trust this power supply here. And to be honest with you, I'm not very sure whether I'm willing to spend extra money on buying a brand like, as an example, Be Quiet, compared to the relatively cheaper power supplies. And this is how I ended up then with this unit actually here. I have bought now this Corsair power supply not because of any specific reasons, but because of the price difference between the Be Quiet power supplies and the Corsair, which was the only reasonable manufacturer which you could buy right away. I went to Conrad, which is not really a shop for computers, but all type of electronic and household equipment. And what do you know? They actually had two type of power supplies on stock. One of them was this Corsair unit, and the other brand what they had was the Be Quiet. Now the Be Quiet power supplies started at 89 euros and this was only 59 euros. And I said, you know what? I know already what is inside one of these units. So I'm gonna take the cheap one and let me see what is this thing actually made of. Let me then first do a quick unboxing of this unit. Now the box itself is nothing fancy. It's more like, average. Actually, I must say that the boxes in which you receive the Be Quiet power supplies, I mean, those look some really classy boxes. I already thrown out the box for this Be Quiet power supply what I just showed you because I moved a couple months ago and I didn't have space for such trash. But it seems to me that they have probably invested more money into the box and into the high-end cooler instead of putting it into the electronics. So this is why I'm gonna check now this Corsair unit. And I really hope that in this case the electronics, which I'm more interested about than the fancy look factor, is actually better or at least comparable with the Be Quiet power supplies, which then start at 90 euros. After opening the case, then we're gonna find the instruction manual in different languages, a warranty guide, then some silica gel, and the power cables are nicely tied together. There is even, by the way, a Schuko type power cable here. The power supply itself is just placed into this bubble wrap. So the packaging is definitely minimalistic compared to the Be Quiet packaging, which, as I said, I mean, that thing, just the package alone was probably worth like 5 or 10 euros. So I'm not wondering that they didn't have money anymore for the electronics. So that's why I'm hoping that they put here the money inside the unit and not for the looks and all kinds of bits and pieces what you actually do not really use in real life. Then let me take out this power supply from the case. And it seems that we need to then cut it loose. In addition to the power supply and then to this power cord, There was also 4 screws inside the packaging in this plastic bag, and then these 4 screws you can use if you eventually don't have them with your case to actually screw the power supply into your PC case. When I compare now the different ratings for the rails and the amperages, so on the Corsair it has a plus 3.3 volt rail. Most probably you will not be able to see in the video camera, so that's why I'm saying the numbers, calling them out. So the 3.3 volt rail is up to 18 amps. In comparison, for the Be Quiet, that is 30 amps, which is considerably better. Then for the plus 5 volt, it can do the Corsair 18 amps. In contrast to that, the Be Quiet can do 30 amps, which is, it's double of that value. So combined on the 3.3 and the 5 volt rail, the Be Quiet can give you 160 watt, at least according to this Zettel. I don't know whether that is true, but yeah, that's what the manufacturers wrote on the units. In comparison, the combined power for Corsair for the 3.3 and the plus 5 volt rail is a 110 watt. Now one has to keep in mind that the modern personal computers, or even servers of that matter, are not using the plus 5 and the plus 3.3 volt rail that much anymore, because nowadays everything relies on the plus 12 volt rail, especially the graphic cards and such. They have the 6 and the 8 pin 12 volt connectors. So, and also the CPUs are actually then fed by such a 6 or 8 pin plus 12 volt connector as well. So it means that it doesn't matter with the Corsair unit that it cannot do so much on the plus 3 and the plus 5 volt rails like the Be Quiet. It can just work as fine as the other one if it is good on the plus 12 volt rails. So let us then see what is going on with the 12 volt rails. So in the case of Be Quiet, it actually has 2 different separate 12 volt rails. One of them you can use up to 25 amps, and from the second one you can load maximum of 18 amps. Or you can do a combined 40 amps, which is at the end of the day 480 watt in total. In comparison to that, in the Corsair unit, it has a single plus 12 volt circuit and not 2 like on the Be Quiet. And this single circuit can be loaded up to 42 amps of current, which is then 504 watt of maximum power what you can take out of the plus 12 volt rail, which at the end of the day means that the Corsair unit can do on the plus 12 volt rail the same like the Be Quiet on the 2 rails combined, because the 2 rails combined was 40 amps. Regarding now the minus 12 volt rail, that is really not important nowadays, because the minus 12 volt is only used by analog audio cards and the serial port. So you often find that modern power supplies do not even have a pin populated on the minus 12 volt rail. But anyway, so both of them can do at least give you minus 12 volt, and they can be loaded up to a half an amp. The Corsair is 0.3 amps, but as I said, that's again not an issue at all. Then the plus 5 volt standby is something which might be interesting, because That is what is being used. As an example, if you plug in a mobile phone and you want to do quick charging when your PC is actually not actively being turned on. So anyway, according to this sticker, the Be Quiet can do 15 watt on the plus 5 watt standby, and the Corsair can do a maximum of 12.5 watt on the plus 5 watt standby. When it comes to the cooling fans, that is one of the big good points about Be Quiet, that it uses a little bit special made cooling fan, and they are really high quality cooling fans. Well, at the end of the day, both units are then sold with a 12 centimeter fan. In this case, there is a fan cage put in separately, which is definitely better for the airflow. In the case of the Corsair unit here on the left, actually they just protruded here the metal casing. So yeah, I mean, that's still totally okay. The fan designs, the blades are definitely different between the two units, and personally I would expect that the Be Quiet fans should be definitely better. I don't know about these fans in the Corsair units. Personally, I don't have much experience with it. I hope that it will just work fine as well. Now, regarding the cabling, as you see, both power supplies come in already well-arranged cable looms. I find that the Be Quiet one is using thicker cables, which is definitely better. So especially on the 24-pin ATX connector, you can really feel that this connector is a lot thicker than the cables inside the Corsair. Regarding the CPU power connection, so they are both using the standardized 8-pin CPU power connector. The one on the Be Quiet is about 3 centimeters longer than from the Corsair, and actually in my large case that might be a difference, because even this one reached really on the limit. So with this one I will probably have to stretch the cable quite a bit to get it connected to the motherboard. So they could have given a little bit at least longer cable if the cables are so thin. Now when it comes to the SATA power cables for different SATA drives, here the Be Quiet power supply gives you 4 of the SATA power cables. In general, the SATA power cables are considerably longer, and the power cables are actually, or at least the connectors, are in such locations that you can actually use them. In strong contrast to that, on the Corsair one, I found that it practically gives you only 2 of the usable SATA power connectors, and it also have a third SATA power connector here in one of the other cables, but I think that this is totally useless because the cable is so short that it will simply not reach your drive. So I frankly don't really understand what the designers or the engineers have been thinking when they designed this power supply from Corsair. I mean, come on guys. When it comes to the standard Molex connectors, which is actually not much in use anymore, so the Be Quiet one have 5 of them and the Corsair one have 4 of them. But again, the cables are considerably shorter, so I would still then prefer from this perspective the Be Quiet unit. By the way, both power supplies do have a floppy disk power supply connector, and Considering that we are already in 2016, I'm really wondering who is still using the floppy disk anymore. So yeah, instead of this, they could have put in an additional power connector for SATA instead. I mean, come on, this is what you need, not the floppy drive. Due to this reduced number of the SATA power connectors on the power supply, I will actually have a hard time with the Corsair, because I need at least 4 of these to power all the drives what I have inside my computer. So yeah, most probably I will have to unplug the optical drive, because I just simply don't have a power cable going to it. So from that perspective, buying this Corsair power supply is definitely regrettable. When it comes to the PCI Express power connectors, so this is at the end of the day mainly used for graphic cards nowadays, then as you see, the Be Quiet have a huge advantage, because it does have 2 separate plus 12 volt power rails. So you get 2 really physically separate 6+2 pin power connectors for your graphic card, or you might use an SLI, so you use one for one of the cards and the other one for the second card. In contrast to that, the Corsair is then giving you a single cable, and then they have a wire split made out of that single cable. This is definitely not something which I would be very comfortable of putting into a high-end GeForce graphic card or AMD graphic card, you name it. Yeah, I mean, this is just really not looking like a very trustworthy solution. Now keep in mind that personally I do not game about 8 years ago. So I do not care at all about the PCI Express power. Other people who watch this video, they might be interested in it. I thought that this is definitely something worthy of pointing out. Regarding then the electronics inside these 2 units, so you might check out my video where I'm doing the teardown and the component level overview of the Be Quiet power supply. Regarding this Corsair unit, I didn't open it yet up because it has a very naughty warranty void if broken sticker on it. And I haven't tested this unit yet, so I cannot give it back if it goes wrong on me. Anyway, I definitely looked inside the unit through these holes, what you see here, and also from this side you might see a lot of things. So the main differences which I spotted are the following. The switch here on the Corsair is an actual clunking power switch, and it is really switching the 230 volt AC. Then, as far as I can tell, most of the capacitors inside this Corsair are 105 degrees C rated capacitors, whereas, as you remember, these capacitors from the Be Quiet unit were only 85 degrees C rated, which is really poor for a power supply which is known to get hot. So that is again a good point for Corsair. But at least, at this stage, I sadly have to stop with the positives on the electronics for the Corsair. Namely, I looked then inside from the side to check then the major components, and I found that the design is super minimalistic. It uses 2 very thin aluminum heat spreaders. In this side there is a heat spreader, and in that small, and I really mean small and thin aluminum heatsink, which barely have a surface area, there are 4 field effect transistors mounted. because it does have active power factor correction. So the active power factor correction and the actual chopping field effect transistors are all sitting on this side. In this side, then there is a second, again, really thin, with no surface area aluminum heatsink then placed into the unit. And on this heatsink, there seems to be 6 or 8 Schottky diodes. I cannot really see it from the fan whether it's 6 or 8. And the capacitor values are rather low, so I found that they are only about 1000 microfarad for 16 volts, and that is really small capacity, considering that this is supposed to be 500 watt, or this is even 550 watt power supply. So I would suspect that under load this thing gonna produce lots of heat, and it gonna blast the heat like crazy. To be now then brutally honest with you, so what is my personal final conclusion when I compare these two power supplies? To me, the Be Quiet power supply still looks to be a better alternative than this Corsair unit. Many thanks for watching this video, and then let me know what is then your personal opinion and also what is your experience, especially with this Corsair power supply.